The Wyoming wind carried the bite of early winter, scraping across the barren ridges like a dull blade against stone. Clay Thatcher stood at the edge of his property, watching the horizon where gray clouds gathered like an army preparing to march. His weathered hands gripped the fence post he'd been repairing, knuckles white against the rough wood. Another storm coming. Another night, alone with the memories. The cabin behind him squatted against the hillside, built from logs he'd cut and hauled himself 3 years back. It wasn't much, 2 rooms, a stone chimney that drew poorly, gaps between the logs stuffed with mud and moss. But it kept the worst of the weather out. More importantly, it was far enough from Redemption Creek that folks left him be. Clay turned back to his work, driving the last nail into the post with practiced swings. The familiar rhythm helped quiet the noise in his head, though it never went away completely. Not since that day at Willow Bend when his world had ended in blood and screaming. Inside the cabin, he set his rifle against the wall within arm's reach of the bed. Same spot every night. The Winchester had become an extension of his body, as necessary as breathing. He'd tried sleeping without it once. The nightmares had been worse that night, if such a thing were possible. His hands had reached for a weapon that wasn't there, and he'd woken gasping, clawing at empty air while phantom war cries echoed in his ears. Clay struck a match and lit the oil lamp, amber light pushing back the gathering darkness. His shadow stretched across the rough planks of the floor as he moved to the stove. Beans again tonight. Salt pork if he was feeling ambitious. He'd gotten used to the monotony, the way he'd gotten used to the ache in his shoulder when the weather changed, the way he'd gotten used to being alone. But lately, the silence had grown heavier. It pressed against him like a physical weight, especially during the long winter nights when the wind howled down from the peaks and rattled the shutters. He found himself talking to the horses just to hear a voice, even if it was his own. Found himself staring at the empty chair across the table, imagining what it might be like to have someone sitting there. The thought had been growing for months now, taking root like a weed he couldn't quite pull. It was Tom Morrison down at the general store who'd planted the seed, mentioning how his nephew had sent for a bride through one of those matrimonial agencies back east. Got himself a right proper wife, Tom had said, weighing out Clay's monthly supplies. Woman can cook, keeps house, gave him 2 sons already. Course, he's got that nice spread down by the river, not like... Tom had caught himself, but Clay knew what he'd meant to say. Not like your place, not like you. Clay had left without responding, but the idea had followed him home. A wife. Not for love. He'd buried that possibility at Willow Bend along with his unit. But for the practical things. Someone to keep the cabin warm, someone to cook meals that weren't beans and hardtack, someone to fill the silence without asking questions he couldn't answer. He'd written the letter 3 times before sending it. Kept it simple, honest. Laid out what he had to offer. A cabin. 60 acres of decent grazing land. A small herd of cattle. Enough money saved to keep them fed through winter. He'd mentioned he was a veteran, figuring that might count for something. Hadn't mentioned the nightmares or the scars or the way his hands shook sometimes for no reason at all. The agency had responded within a month. Professional. Businesslike. They had several candidates who might suit his requirements. Women of good character seeking honest marriages in the Western Territories. The letter had included a daguerreotype of a woman named Miriam Turner. Plain face, dark hair pulled back severe, eyes that stared straight at the camera without smiling. Something about those eyes had made him look twice. They reminded him of his own, holding secrets, asking for nothing. Her letter had been brief. She could cook, clean, tend a garden. She'd worked as a domestic servant, knew how to manage a household. She was 26, old for a bride. But Clay figured that suited him fine. He wasn't looking for some giggling girl fresh out of finishing school. The last line of her letter had decided him. I seek only a quiet life and honest work. I make no demands beyond shelter and respect. No demands. Clay understood that. He'd sent the travel money the next day. Now, waiting for her arrival, he found himself second-guessing everything. The cabin looked shabbier than ever. He'd tried to fix it up some, patched the worst gaps in the walls, built a new bed frame for the second room, Even bought fabric for curtains, though he had no idea how to hang them. But it still looked like what it was. A lonely man's refuge from a world that had become too loud, too bright, too full of questions. Clay ladled beans onto a tin plate, ate standing by the window. Snow had started to fall, fat flakes that would pile up by morning. She was due on tomorrow's stage, weather permitting. He tried to imagine her here, moving through these rooms, but the image wouldn't come clear. All he could see was that steady gaze from the photograph, those eyes that seemed to understand something about silence. His own reflection stared back from the dark window, face thinner than it used to be, beard gone gray at the edges though he wasn't yet 35. The scar on his jaw showed white against his weather-burned skin, souvenir of a Cheyenne knife that had missed his throat by inches. There were other scars she couldn't see, the ones that mattered most. Clay turned away from the window, checked the rifle's load out of habit. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. Tonight, there was nothing to do but wait and try to sleep, though sleep had become another battle he rarely won. He'd grown used to fighting wars in his dreams, waking with his heart hammering and sweat cooling on his skin. Sometimes he fired at shadows before coming fully awake, putting holes in the walls that he patched in the morning with shaking hands. He wondered if she would run when that happened, wondered if he should warn her somehow. But what could he say? Sometimes I'm not here, sometimes I'm back at Willow Bend with the smell of powder and blood, and I can't tell what's real and what's memory. No, better to let her find out on her own, make her own choice about staying or going. Clay banked the fire and blew out the lamp. In the darkness, he found his way to the bed by touch, laid the rifle in its place. The familiar weight of it brought a measure of comfort, though he knew it was false. The rifle hadn't saved his unit, hadn't saved him from becoming whatever he was now, not quite alive, not quite dead, just existing in the space between. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the pines. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, long and mournful. Clay closed his eyes and tried not to think about tomorrow, about the woman traveling through the night toward this place. Tried not to hope for anything beyond another pair of hands to share the work. But hope was like the memories. It came whether he wanted it or not. And as sleep finally took him under, pulling him down into the familiar nightmare landscape of smoke and screaming, some small part of him wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was tired enough of being alone to let someone else in, even if it meant risking the careful walls he'd built between himself and the world. The rifle stayed within reach all night long. The stage was late. Clay had been waiting at the depot in Redemption Creek since noon, watching the road that wound down from the mountain pass. Snow from the night before had turned to slush under the afternoon sun, making the streets a muddy mess. He stood apart from the other folks gathered there, a couple of merchants waiting on supplies, the minister's wife expecting relatives. They gave him the usual wide berth, which suited him fine. When the stage finally appeared, lurching around the bend with mud splattered up to the windows, Clay felt his chest tighten. He'd faced Confederate cavalry charges with less apprehension than he felt watching that coach roll to a stop. The driver, Jake Sullivan, climbed down, cursing the weather and the roads. "Lucky we made it at all," he announced to no one in particular. "Nearly slid clean off Devil's Curve." Passengers began emerging. A traveling salesman, 2 miners heading to the goldfields, an elderly woman who was immediately swept up by the minister's wife. Then, last, her. Miriam Turner stepped down from the coach without assistance, though Jake half-heartedly offered his hand after she was already on the ground. She wore a plain brown traveling dress, sturdy boots, and a dark wool coat that had seen better years. Her single carpet bag followed, tossed down by Jake with little care. It landed in the mud. Clay moved forward, picked up the bag. "Miss Turner?" She turned to face him, and he saw that the photograph hadn't lied. Plain features, dark hair pinned back tight, and those eyes, brown, steady, giving nothing away. "Mr. Thatcher." Not a question. She knew who he was, had probably spotted him the moment she looked out the coach window. He wondered what she saw, what conclusions she was drawing. "Wagons this way," he said, not knowing what else to offer. She nodded, followed, without comment. Behind them, Clay heard Jake mutter something to one of the merchants, caught the words "mail order" and a snicker. His jaw tightened, but he kept walking. Let them talk. They always did anyway. The ride to the cabin took 2 hours through country that grew rougher with each mile. Miriam sat straight-backed on the wagon seat, hands folded in her lap, eyes on the landscape. She didn't try to make conversation, didn't exclaim over the views or complain about the jarring ride. The silence between them wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't demanding either. Only once did she speak, when they passed a burned-out homestead, chimney standing lone sentinel among the ruins. "Indians?" she asked. "Lightning," Clay replied. 3 summers back, family had already moved on. She nodded, returned to her silence. The cabin looked smaller than ever when they arrived, squatting gray and weathered against the hillside. Clay pulled up the wagon, set the brake. "This is it." Miriam studied the place for a long moment, taking in the rough logs, the patched roof, the isolation of it. "It's quiet," she said finally. "Yes." "Good." He carried her bag inside, showed her the main room with its stove and table, the smaller room he'd prepared for her. She walked through slowly, running her hand along the surfaces, testing the sturdiness of things. When she reached the window, she stopped. He'd hung the curtains, crooked, clumsy, but trying. "Thank you," she said, not turning around. Clay left her to settle in, went to tend the horses. When he returned, she had water heating on the stove and was unpacking her few belongings. A spare dress, undergarments quickly hidden away, a small sewing kit, a Bible worn soft at the edges. No photographs, no letters, no mementos of whatever life she'd left behind. They ate supper in near silence. Beans again, though she'd added something to them that made them taste less like defeat. She'd found the salt pork, fried it crispy, made coffee that didn't taste of burnt grounds. Clay found himself eating slower than usual, aware of her movements, the quiet efficiency of her hands. "The stage driver," she said suddenly. He was unpleasant the entire journey. Clay looked up. "Jake Sullivan's an ass. Pardon the language. No pardon needed. It's an accurate assessment." She took a sip of coffee. "He made certain assumptions about women traveling alone to marry strangers. People assume a lot of things." "Yes." She met his eyes briefly, then looked away. "They do." That night, Clay showed her how to bar the door, warned her about the wind that could rattle the shutters. He pointed to his room. "I'm in there if you need anything. Keep my door open at night. Habit from the war." He paused, wondered if he should say more. "Sometimes I have difficult dreams. Make noise. Don't be alarmed." She studied him for a moment. "I understand." He doubted that, but didn't argue. Clay lay awake long into the night, hyper-aware of another person in his space. He could hear her moving in the next room, the creak of the new bed frame, then silence. The rifle was in its place beside him, but for once his hand didn't rest on it. Instead, he found himself listening to the sound of her breathing through the thin walls, steady and even. When the nightmare came, as it always did, he woke with a strangled shout, hand grabbing for the Winchester. He sat up gasping, waiting for his heart to slow, for the shadows to become just shadows again. Through the doorway, he could see her standing in the main room, silhouetted by moonlight from the window. She didn't speak, didn't move closer, just stood there for a moment before returning to her room. In the morning, she made breakfast without mentioning the incident. Flapjacks from the flour he'd forgotten he had, coffee, even some preserved peaches she'd brought in her bag. Clay ate in surprised silence, trying to remember the last time someone had cooked for him. "I'll need to know your routine," she said, clearing the plates. "When you take meals, what work needs doing, where things are kept." He outlined his days, checking the cattle, mending fences, hunting when meat ran low. She listened without interrupting, nodded when he finished, I can help with the animals. I'm accustomed to work. It's rough work. I'm not delicate. Mr. Thatcher. He noticed the scars then, as she rolled up her sleeves to wash dishes. Thin white lines on her forearms, one deeper mark near her wrist. She saw him looking, pulled the sleeves down without haste. Neither of them commented. The days settled into a pattern. Clay would wake, find coffee already made, breakfast waiting. She moved through the cabin like a ghost, always working but never intrusive. She learned his preferences without asking. Strong coffee, eggs when they had them, silence in the morning. He learned hers too, tea in the evening, extra blankets against the cold, the way she hummed very softly when she thought he wasn't nearby. But wariness hung between them like a third presence. He watched her from the corners of his eyes, noticed how she never turned her back on him completely, how she kept knives within reach when cooking. She watched him too, tracking his movements, the way his hands tightened on tools when memories pressed close. 2 weeks in, she asked about the ranch. You run cattle. Small herd, 40 head, maybe 50 if we don't lose too many this winter. We? He paused, realized what he'd said. I meant, it's just habit, from before. She continued kneading bread dough. You had partners, had a unit. The words came out harsher than intended. They're gone. Her hands stilled for just a moment, then resumed their rhythm. I see. That night, the nightmare was worse. He came awake shooting, the rifle crack explosive in the small space. The bullet punched through the wall high up, showering splinters. Clay sat shaking, gun smoke hanging in the air, waiting for her to run screaming into the night. Instead, she appeared in the doorway, lamp in hand. You missed the window, she said calmly. We'll need to patch that come morning. He stared at her, unable to form words. She set the lamp on the table, put water onto heat, made tea while he sat trying to remember how to breathe normally. When she handed him the cup, their fingers brushed. Neither of them pulled away immediately. You don't have to stay, he said finally. I can send you back, pay for the ticket, give you enough to start somewhere else. She sat across from him, cradling her own cup. Do you want me to leave? Did he? The question hung there while he searched for an answer. These 2 weeks had been strange, unsettling, but also... He'd slept better, some nights, eaten better, certainly, and the silence, when it came, felt less like drowning. No, he admitted, but you should know what you're getting. I'm not... He gestured helplessly. I'm not whole. She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her tea. When she looked up, something flickered in those steady brown eyes. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. Neither am I, Mr. Thatcher, she said softly. Neither am I. The first heavy snow came in early November, transforming the landscape overnight into something clean and foreign. Miriam stood at the window, watching the flakes fall thick and steady, her breath fogging the glass. She'd been with Clay for 6 weeks now, long enough to learn the rhythms of this isolated life, though not long enough to feel she belonged. We'll need more firewood, Clay said from behind her. He'd developed a habit of announcing his presence, never approaching too suddenly. She appreciated that, though they'd never discussed it. I can help split it. You know how to swing an axe? She turned from the window. I can learn. That's how she found herself outside in the sharp air, watching Clay demonstrate the proper stance, the way to let the axe weight do the work. His movements were economical, practiced. The wood split clean under his blade, falling away in perfect halves. Your turn, he said. Stepping back, the axe was heavier than she'd expected. Her first swing went wide, barely nicking the log. The second buried the blade at an angle, stuck fast. Clay moved to help free it, and for a moment they stood close, both hands on the handle. She could smell the wool of his coat, the soap he used, something underneath that was just him. Twist as you pull, he said, his voice rougher than usual. They freed the axe together, and she tried again. This time the log split, not cleanly, but enough. Clay nodded approval, and something warm unfurled in her chest. By afternoon, they had a respectable pile, though her arms ached and blisters were forming despite the work gloves. They moved the wood to the lean-to in companionable silence, working in rhythm now, finding the easier pattern that came with shared labor. That evening, as she cooked supper, Clay surprised her by offering to help. "I can peel potatoes," he said, almost shy. "Did it often enough in the army." They worked side by side at the small table, lamplight casting shadows on the walls. His hands, she noticed, were steady with the knife despite their slight tremor at rest. She found herself watching the sure movements, the care he took with each potato. "You're staring," he said without looking up. Heat rushed to her face. "I apologize. Didn't say I minded." The words hung there between them, charged with possibility. Miriam focused on her own work, but she was acutely aware of him now, the space he took up, the sound of his breathing, the way he rolled his shoulders to ease some old ache after supper. The storm picked up, wind howling around the cabin corners. They sat by the stove, Clay cleaning his rifle while she mended one of his shirts. The domestic quiet of it struck her suddenly. How normal this might look from outside, a husband and wife, sharing the evening hours. The thought made her hands still. "Something wrong?" Clay looked up from his gun. "No." She forced her fingers back to work. "Just thinking." He studied her a moment longer, then returned to his task, but she felt his glances after that, quick looks when he thought she wasn't paying attention. The next morning brought crisis. Clay's horse, Caesar, had gotten into the grain and colicked during the night. She found Clay in the barn at dawn, walking the suffering animal in slow circles, his face tight with worry. "How can I help?" she asked. "Need to keep him moving. Can't let him roll or he'll twist a gut." They took turns through the morning, walking the horse despite the bitter cold. Caesar wanted to go down, to thrash against the pain in his belly. It took all their combined strength to keep him up and walking. Once, when the horse nearly pulled Clay off his feet, Miriam grabbed the lead rope too, adding her weight. They stood pressed together for a moment, breathing hard, fighting the horse's pain as one. "That's it," Clay murmured, though whether to her or the horse, she couldn't tell. "Just hold on." By noon, Caesar began to improve. They got him to drink a little water, saw his ears perk with interest when the other horses called. Clay sagged against the stall door, exhaustion clear in every line of his body. "You should rest," Miriam said. "In a bit. Want to be sure he's through it." She brought him coffee and sandwiches, sat with him in the hay to eat. Their shoulders touched, neither pulling away. The barn was warmer than outside, filled with the comfortable sounds of horses eating, shifting in their stalls. "Thought I'd lose him," Clay admitted. "He's been with me since I came here. Steady horse. Doesn't spook at shadows like I do." "You don't spook," she said. "You're careful. There's a difference." He turned to look at her, something raw in his expression. "Most folks don't see it that way. Most folks haven't—" She stopped, looked away. "Haven't what?" The question hung there. She could feel him waiting, not pushing, just leaving space for words if she wanted to fill it. Part of her did wanted to tell someone who might understand, but the words had been locked away so long, she didn't know how to free them. "Haven't had to be careful," she finished lamely. He nodded, accepting the non-answer, but his hand moved slightly, covering hers where it rested on the hay. Just for a moment, warm and calloused and unexpectedly gentle. Then he stood, went to check Caesar again. That night, the wind grew fierce, battering the cabin like something alive and angry. Snow piled against the door, the windows. They were cut off completely now, alone in their small pocket of warmth and light. Miriam couldn't sleep. The wind's howling reminded her too much of other sounds, other nights. She rose, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, went to make tea, found Clay already up, standing at the window. "Storm's getting worse," he said. She moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel his warmth. The window showed nothing but white, snow driven horizontal by the gale. "I used to be afraid of storms," she heard herself say. When I was young, before I learned there were worse things. What changed? The question was quiet, careful. She appreciated that he didn't assume, didn't fill in the blanks himself. I changed. She pulled the blanket tighter. Had to. He nodded, understanding without explanation. They stood together watching the storm rage, and for the first time since arriving, she didn't feel alone. The next morning brought a more serious problem. Part of the roof had given way under the snow's weight, opening a hole in the corner of the main room. Snow poured in, already forming a drift against the wall. Damn, Clay said, surveying the damage. Need to patch that before we lose half the house. It was dangerous work in the storm, but necessary. They worked together, Miriam holding boards while Clay nailed, both of them battered by wind and snow. Once, a gust nearly took her off her feet. Clay caught her, pulled her against him until it passed. "You all right?" he shouted over the wind. She nodded, aware of his arm around her waist, the solid strength of him. For a moment, she let herself lean into it, let herself feel protected. Then the wind eased, and they went back to work. They got the hole patched, though they were both soaked and frozen by the time they stumbled back inside. Miriam's hands were too numb to work the buttons of her coat. Clay helped, his own fingers clumsy with cold. They were shivering, teeth chattering, but somehow laughing too at the absurdity of it all. "Get changed," he said. "I'll stoke the fire." She did, grateful for dry clothes, though still shaking when she returned to the main room. Clay had the stove blazing, had laid out blankets near it. He'd changed too, hair still damp, frost melting from his beard. "Sit," he ordered, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Need to warm up proper or we'll catch our deaths." They sat close to the stove, close to each other, sharing warmth as the feeling returned to fingers and toes. The enforced intimacy should have been uncomfortable, but wasn't. It felt natural, necessary. Right. "Thank you," Clay said suddenly, "for the help. With all of it, Caesar, the roof. I'd have managed alone, but—" "But you don't have to," she finished softly. He looked at her then, really looked at her. She saw something shift in his expression, walls coming down just a little. His hand found hers under the blanket, fingers intertwining carefully, question and answer in one gesture. They sat that way as the storm raged outside, neither speaking, neither moving away. The touch was simple, chaste even, but in this cabin at the edge of nowhere, with the world cut away by wind and snow, it felt like everything. The touch of her fingers against his scar had been like lightning striking dry timber. Clay stood frozen in the lamplight, Miriam's hand still resting on his chest where the shirt hung open. Her words echoed in the silence between them. "I know." Not what happened, not how awful, not the pity or morbid curiosity he'd grown accustomed to hiding from. Just acknowledgement, simple and profound. He pulled away, fingers fumbling to button his shirt. "I need to check the horses." "Clay." Her voice stopped him at the door. When he turned, she was still standing where he'd left her, arms wrapped around herself. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "No." The word came out rougher than intended. "No, I just need a minute." The barn was cold, but the familiar smells of hay and horses helped steady him. He leaned against Caesar's stall, trying to make sense of the turmoil in his chest. 3 months she'd been here now, 3 months of careful distance, of learning each other's patterns while maintaining the boundaries that kept them safe. And in one moment, with one touch, she'd crossed a line he hadn't even realized he'd drawn. The problem was, he wanted her to cross it, wanted more than he had any right to want. He stayed in the barn until his hands stopped shaking, until the phantom sensation of her fingers on his skin faded to memory. When he returned to the cabin, she had breakfast waiting as always, moving through her morning routine as if nothing had changed. But he caught the quick glance she gave him, the slight tension in her shoulders. They ate in heavier silence than usual. Finally, she set down her fork. "I know what it's like." she said quietly. To have marks that tell a story you never asked to be part of. Clay looked up, found her watching him steadily. Miriam? I was 19. The words came measured, careful. Working for a family in Kansas. The son, he took what he wanted. When I tried to tell someone, they said I'd tempted him. Let him on. His mother turned me out without references. Her fingers traced the edge of her coffee cup. I found work where I could. Learned to be careful. Learned to be quiet. But the marks remain. The rage that rose in him was sudden and fierce. If I knew his name, it doesn't matter now. She met his eyes. That's not who I am anymore. Just like that scar isn't who you are. It's just evidence that we survived. Clay stared at her. This woman who'd appeared in his life like a ghost and turned out to be flesh and blood and iron will. How do you do it? Move forward? Same as you. One day at a time, one chore at a time. A slight smile touched her lips. One carefully mended shirt at a time. Despite everything, he found himself almost smiling back. I've noticed you've been fixing them. They've never fit better. You've been wearing shirts made for a different man, one who didn't guard his left side or favor his right shoulder. He hadn't realized she'd been watching him that closely. The thought should have unsettled him. Instead, it felt like being seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. That night, the old dream came vicious and vivid. Willow Bend in all its horror, the ambush, the screaming, Matthews dying in his arms while enemy riders circled like wolves. He woke gasping, covered in sweat, hand clutching empty air where his rifle should be. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was, when he was. Clay, Miriam's voice, calm and steady from the doorway. You're home. You're safe. He focused on her silhouette, using it to anchor himself to the present. I'm sorry. Did I wake you? I wasn't sleeping. She moved into the room, set something on his bedside table. Tea, he realized. She'd made tea. Do you want to talk about it? No. Then, surprising himself, yes, I don't know. She sat on the edge of the bed, careful to maintain distance. I'll listen, or I'll sit quietly. Whatever helps. The story came in fragments. The scouting mission that went wrong. The mixed group that ambushed them. Some native, some white renegades. All working together for plunder. How his unit was caught in a crossfire, picked off one by one. How he'd played dead among the corpses of his friends until nightfall. Then crawled 3 miles to safety with a Cheyenne arrow in his chest and Matthew's blood still drying on his hands. The worst part, he said, staring at the ceiling, was that I knew some of them, the attackers, white men I'd shared drinks with in town. They killed their own kind for gold and horses, then let the tribes take the blame. Miriam was quiet for a long moment. Is that why you stay away from town? You think they're still there? Some, maybe, or men just like them, men who smile to your face and plan your death for profit. He finally looked at her. I can't tell anymore who's dangerous and who's not, so I assume everyone is. Including me? At first. He studied her face in the lamplight. Not anymore. What changed? You didn't run when I shot at shadows. When I woke up screaming. You just stayed. She shifted slightly, her hand coming to rest near his on the quilt. Not touching, but close. I've done my own shooting at shadows. Different ones, but shadows all the same. They sat in comfortable silence while his breathing steadied. Finally, she stood. Try to rest. I'll be right outside if you need anything. Miriam? She paused at the door. Thank you. We survive how we can. Clay, sometimes that means learning to trust again. The days that followed were different. The careful distance between them had shifted into something else. Not closeness exactly, but possibility. They still worked in their established patterns, but now there were moments. A brush of hands passing dishes, standing closer than necessary while reviewing supply lists. Conversations that went deeper than weather and chores. One evening, as she darned socks by lamplight, Miriam began humming. Clay looked up from the harness he was mending, struck by the simple domesticity of it. When she noticed him watching, she stopped. "Don't," he said. "I like it." "What song is that?" "Barbara Allen. My mother used to sing it." She paused. "Before she died." "You don't talk about your family much." "Neither do you." "Fair point." He went back to his work. Then, "I had a sister, Sarah. Married a shopkeeper in Ohio last I heard. Haven't written since the war." "Why not?" He considered the question. "What would I say? Dear Sarah, I'm alive but wish I wasn't half the time. Sleep with a gun. Trust no one. How's the shop?" Miriam set down her darning. "You could say, I'm alive. I think of you. I'm trying to build something good here. Is that true? The last part?" She looked at him directly. "I'd like to think we both are." The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Clay was in the barn when he heard horses approaching. 3 riders, moving slow through the snow. He reached for the rifle, old habits dying hard, but recognized Tom Morrison from town before they got close. "Thatcher," Tom called out. "Got a minute?" Clay met them in the yard, noting how the other 2 men, strangers, studied the place with calculating eyes. "Morrison, what brings you out?" "These gentlemen are looking for someone. Woman named Miriam Turner. Thought you might have seen her, being as you were expecting a bride around the time she'd have passed through." Clay kept his face neutral. "Can't say I have. My wife's name is Mary Thatcher." One of the strangers, a thin man with pale eyes, smiled unpleasantly. "Might we meet Mrs. Thatcher, just to ease our minds? She's poorly today, not receiving visitors." Clay shifted slightly, hand moving closer to his sidearm. "What's your interest in this woman you're seeking?" "Let's say she has obligations back east. Debts to pay." Tom Morrison looked uncomfortable. "Now, gentlemen, if Clay says he hasn't seen her, we'd still like to meet the missus." Pale Eyes insisted. "Won't take but a moment." The cabin door opened. Miriam stepped out, shawl wrapped tight against the cold. She moved to stand beside Clay, chin up, meeting their gazes steadily. "I'm Mrs. Thatcher. I heard voices. Is something wrong?" Pale Eyes studied her for a long moment. Clay tensed, ready for whatever came next, but Miriam stood calm, even smiled slightly. "Would you gentlemen care for coffee? It's a cold ride from town." "No need, ma'am," Tom said quickly. "We'll be on our way. Sorry to trouble you." The strangers exchanged looks, but didn't argue. They turned their horses, rode away without farewell. Tom lingered a moment. "Careful. Clay, those 2, they're not the law, whatever they claim." After they left, Clay and Miriam stood in the yard, watching until the riders disappeared over the ridge. "They'll be back," she said quietly. "Yes. I should go, before I bring more trouble to your door." He turned to her then, saw the resignation in her eyes. "Is that what you want?" "What I want hasn't mattered much in my life. It matters to me." She looked up at him, surprise flickering across her features. He reached out, carefully, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he touched her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Stay," he said. "We'll face whatever comes, together." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her own hand coming up to cover his. "All right." That night, for the first time, Clay slept without the rifle in reach. The change between them was like spring coming to the mountains, gradual, then sudden. Small gestures became their language. Clay's hand on Miriam's shoulder as he passed behind her at the stove, her fingers brushing his when she handed him his coffee. The way they'd begun sitting closer in the evenings, no longer needing the full width of the table between them. On a clear morning in late February, Clay found her standing at the window, watching the sun paint the snow-covered peaks gold and rose. He moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Beautiful," she murmured. "Yes," he agreed, though he wasn't looking at the mountains. She turned, caught him watching her. Color rose in her cheeks, but she didn't look away. The morning light caught in her dark hair, loosely pinned for once instead of scraped back severe. He reached up, touched a strand that had escaped. Miriam. Her name came out rougher than intended. "I'm here," she said softly, understanding what he couldn't quite say. The kiss was careful, tentative. Two people who'd forgotten how to trust their own wanting. Her lips were chapped from the winter air, and she tasted of the peppermint tea she favored. When they parted, her hand rested on his chest, right over the scar she'd touched weeks ago. "I didn't think I'd ever—" He started, then stopped, words failing. "Neither did I." She looked up at him, wonder and worry warring in her expression. "What does this mean?" "I don't know." He covered her hand with his. "But I'd like to find out." They moved through the day's chores with new awareness of each other. When Miriam reached for something on a high shelf, Clay moved behind her, his chest against her back as he retrieved it. She stayed there a moment, leaning into him, and he felt her heartbeat quick as a bird's. "Thank you," she whispered, though they both knew it wasn't about the flour tin. That evening, as she prepared supper, Clay did something he hadn't done since arriving in Wyoming. He took out his mother's fiddle, still wrapped in oilcloth, strings probably ruined from neglect. "You play?" Miriam asked. Surprised. "Used to. Haven't touched it since." He gestured vaguely at the past. "Would you? I mean, if it still works." The strings were indeed shot, but he had extras tucked in the case. As he replaced them, Miriam watched with quiet interest. When he finally drew the bow across, the sound was rough, discordant. "Needs tuning." He worked at it, muscle memory slowly returning. When he tried again, a passable melody emerged. Nothing fancy, just an old dance tune from before the war. Miriam stood, held out her hand. "Dance with me? Here? Now?" "Why not?" So they danced in the small space between table and stove, Clay playing one-handed while his other arm circled her waist. She hummed along, her head coming to rest against his shoulder. When the tune ended, they stayed that way, swaying slightly. "I'm falling in love with you," she said against his shirt. "I thought you should know, in case you want to stop this before." He set the fiddle aside, framed her face with both hands. Too late, already fell. This kiss was different, deeper, hungrier. 4 months of careful distance dissolved in the heat of it. His hands tangled in her hair, pins scattering. Her arms wound around his neck, pulling him closer. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Miriam, I want so much, but I need you to know I can't promise to be easy to live with. The nightmares, the moods—" "Hush." She placed her fingers over his lips. "I'm not asking for easy. I'm not easy either. I'm asking for real, for honest, for together." He caught her hand, kissed her palm. "You have it, all of it." That night, they sat before the fire, Miriam in his lap, his arms around her. It felt miraculous, this simple closeness. He pressed his face to her hair, breathed her in, soap and bread and something uniquely her. "Tell me something good," she said. "Something from before." He thought about it. "I had a dog when I was a boy. Ugly little mutt. Followed me home one day and wouldn't leave. My father said we couldn't afford to feed it, but my mother snuck him scraps. Named him Trouble because that's what my father always called him. Where's that Trouble dog?" She laughed, the sound warming him through. What happened to him? Lived to be ancient. Died peaceful in his sleep the winter before I enlisted. I was glad. Glad he didn't have to wonder why I never came home. "You came home," she said firmly. "Just to a different one." They stayed up late talking, real talking, not the careful exchanges of before. She told him about learning to read by candlelight after long days of housework, how books became her escape. He told her about his first command. The terror and pride mixed together. They shared small memories, building a bridge between their separate pasts and this shared present. When they finally rose to retire, Clay caught her hand. "Stay with me tonight? Just to sleep. I don't want to be alone." "I don't want to be alone either." They lay together fully clothed on top of the quilts, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her. It was awkward at first, both hyper-aware of the other's breathing, every shift and settle, but gradually they relaxed into it. "I haven't shared a bed with anyone since—" Miriam trailed off. "Since he hurt you?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm not afraid with you. I thought I would be, but I'm not." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "I'm glad. Are you afraid?" she asked. He considered lying, decided against it. "Terrified. Not of you, of failing you, of not being enough." She rose up on one elbow, looked down at him in the moonlight. "You're already enough. Just you." The next morning brought a milestone. Clay woke without reaching for his rifle. Instead, he reached for Miriam, pulling her closer. She made a soft sound, burrowing into his warmth. "Morning," she mumbled against his chest. "Morning." He stroked her hair, marveling at the simple pleasure of waking beside someone. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in years." "You?" "No nightmares." He paused, realizing. "First time in, I can't remember." She lifted her head, smiled at him, sleepy and soft. "Good." They rose reluctantly, the day's chores calling, but everything felt different now, charged with possibility. When Clay came in for the noon meal, he kissed her hello like they'd been doing it forever. When she passed behind his chair, she trailed her fingers across his shoulders. That afternoon, while Clay worked on harness repairs, Miriam surprised him with something she'd been making in secret, a new shirt, properly fitted to accommodate his changed stance and the way he favored his right side. "Try it on," she urged. It fit perfectly. Of course. The fabric was soft flannel she must have bought on her last trip to town. The stitching fine and even. But what moved him most were the small details. How she'd reinforced the left shoulder where his rifle usually rested. Added extra room through the chest where the scar tissue pulled. "How did you afford the fabric?" he asked. "I sold some of my mother's lace, the piece I'd been saving." She smoothed the collar. "This seemed more important than keeping relics." He pulled her close, overwhelmed. "You didn't have to. I wanted to. I want to give you things. Good things." She looked up at him, suddenly fierce. "I want to fill your life with good things until there's no room left for the bad." That evening, as Miriam prepared what she announced would be a special dinner, Clay found himself watching her with a fullness in his chest that was almost pain. She'd pinned her hair up but left some tendrils loose, humming as she worked. His home, their home now, smelled of fresh bread and roasting meat, luxuries she'd somehow managed from their meager supplies. "What's the occasion?" he asked. She glanced over her shoulder, smiled. "Being alive. Being here, being together. Pick one." After dinner, the best meal he'd eaten in memory, they cleared the table together. Clay washed while she dried, their hips bumping companionably. When the last dish was put away, he turned to find her watching him with dark, intent eyes. "Miriam?" "I want more," she said simply. "I want everything. If you do—" His breath caught. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He crossed to her in 2 strides, gathered her up, kissed her with all the longing he'd been holding back. She responded with equal fervor, hands fisting in his shirt, the new shirt she'd made with such care. "Yes," he said against her lips. "Yes to everything. Yes to you." They moved to the bedroom slowly, pausing to kiss, to touch, to reassure. There was no rush, no desperation, just the steady build of need and trust and something that might have been healing. When they lay together after, skin to skin in the lamplight, Miriam traced the scar on his chest with gentle fingers. "Does it hurt still?" "Sometimes, less now." She bent, pressed her lips to the raised tissue. "Thank you for surviving, for being here for me to find." Clay pulled her up, held her close, too moved for words. Outside, wind sang through the pines, and snow began to fall again. But inside their small cabin, in their bed, in each other's arms, They'd found something worth more than safety or solitude. They'd found home. The days that followed were like something from another life, a life Clay had thought lost to him forever. He'd wake with Miriam warm against his side, her hair spread across his chest, and lie still just to feel her breathing. They worked side by side through the daily chores, but now there were stolen kisses against the barn wall, lingering touches as they passed, quiet laughter over private jokes. For 2 weeks, they lived in their own world, isolated and complete. Then Clay had to go to town for supplies. He'd put it off as long as possible, but they needed flour, salt, ammunition for the spring hunting. Miriam walked him to the wagon, worry creasing her brow. "Be careful," she said, straightening his collar unnecessarily. "Always am." He kissed her, not caring if anyone might see from the distant road. "I'll be back before dark." The ride to Redemption Creek had never seemed longer. Clay found himself eager to finish his business and return home to Miriam. His mind corrected, marveling at how natural that felt now. Morrison's general store was busy for a weekday. Clay nodded to the familiar faces, ignored the curious stares. He'd just finished loading his supplies when Tom Morrison pulled him aside. "Clay, there's talk about your wife." Clay's hand instinctively moved toward his sidearm. "What kind of talk?" "Those men who came by your place, they've been asking questions, showing a picture around. Some folks are saying—" Tom looked uncomfortable. "They're saying she's not who she claims to be, that she's running from something." "She's my wife," Clay said evenly. "That's all anyone needs to know. I'm not arguing, just warning you. There's ugly rumors starting. About her past, about what she might have done to end up out here." Clay loaded the last sack with careful control. "Tom, you've known me since I arrived here. Have I ever given you trouble? No. Have I ever asked you for anything beyond fair trade? No. Then do me one favor. Next time someone starts spreading gossip about my wife, you remind them that I'm not a patient man, and I'm even less patient where she's concerned." Tom swallowed hard. Understood. But as Clay drove home, unease settled in his chest like a stone. The two strangers were still in town, still hunting. How long before they found what they were looking for? Miriam must have been watching for him. She came out as he pulled up, smiled bright with relief, but her expression changed when she saw his face. "What happened?" He told her while they unloaded supplies, watched her shoulders tighten with each word. When he finished, she stood holding a sack of flour like she'd forgotten it was there. "I should leave," she said quietly, "before this gets worse, before you get hurt because of me." "No." He took the sack from her, set it aside, gripped her shoulders. "We've been through this. You're not going anywhere." "Clay, you don't understand. The things they're saying, some of them might be true. I did run. I did take something when I left." She looked away. "Money. From the family I worked for. The ones who threw me out after their son. After what he did, I took what they owed me in wages, what they'd refused to pay." "Good," Clay said fiercely. "I hope you took more." She looked up at him, startled. "You don't care? I care that you're safe. I care that you're here. I care that you're mine." He cupped her face. "The rest is just noise." That night they made love with a desperate edge, clinging to each other like they could hold back the world through sheer will. After, Miriam lay with her head on his chest, fingers tracing patterns on his skin. "Tell me it will be all right," she whispered. "It will be all right." He pressed his lips to her hair. "I'll make it all right." But the world had a way of keeping promises from being simple. 3 days later, Clay was mending fence in the far pasture when he saw riders approaching. 5 men, moving with purpose. He recognized the 2 strangers from before, plus the sheriff and 2 deputies. Clay stood slowly, kept his hands visible but ready. "Sheriff Banks." "Clay." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "These men have papers, legal papers. They say your wife is wanted back east for theft." "She's my wife," Clay said. "Whatever happened before doesn't matter now." One of the strangers, Pale Eyes, Clay had named him, smiled coldly. Actually, it does. You see, she's not your wife. Not legally. Miriam Turner is already married. The words hit Clay like a physical blow. He kept his face still, but inside, everything tilted sideways. That's a lie, he said. Is it? Pale Eyes produced a document. Marriage certificate. Samuel Harper and Miriam Turner, married in Kansas 4 years ago. Never divorced, which makes your little arrangement here invalid. Where is this Harper? Clay demanded. Dead, the sheriff said quietly. Died last year, but that doesn't change the legal situation. The hell it doesn't. If the man's dead, she's still wanted for theft. Pale Eyes interrupted. $300 taken from the Grayson family. That's a hanging offense in some places. Clay's mind raced. $300, more than most people saw in a year. Enough to start a new life, or enough to compensate for years of unpaid wages and unspoken suffering. I'll pay it, he said. The $300, I'll pay it now. The men exchanged looks. You have that kind of money? The sheriff asked. Clay nodded. It would take everything he'd saved. Leave them with nothing for the winter supplies. But he'd figure that out later. It's in the cabin. They followed him back. A grim procession. Miriam came out as they approached, saw the group, and went very still. Her eyes found Clay's, full of resignation and sorrow. I'm sorry, she said softly. Don't. He dismounted, went to her. Let me handle this. Mr. Thatcher, Pale Eyes called. Step away from the woman. She's my wife, Clay said without turning. We've established that she's not. Sheriff, Clay turned to Banks. You've known me 3 years. I've never asked for anything. I'm asking now. Let me pay the debt. Let us be. Banks shifted in his saddle. It's not that simple. Clay, these men have legal authority. From Kansas. Clay interrupted. This is Wyoming territory. Different jurisdiction. The law is the law. Pale Eyes said. Is it? Clay's hand moved to rest on his sidearm. Not threatening, just present. Because I remember a time when men like you operated outside the law, taking what they wanted, hurting who they wanted. The atmosphere shifted, became dangerous. The deputies' hands drifted toward their weapons. Clay, Miriam said quietly. Don't, please. Listen to the woman, Pale Eyes advised. No need for this to get ugly. It's already ugly. Clay kept his eyes on the sheriff. Banks, I'm going inside to get the money. When I come out, I expect you to take it and leave. All of you. He didn't wait for an answer, took Miriam's arm and guided her inside. The moment the door closed, she turned to him. You can't pay them. It's everything you have. It's nothing compared to you. He went to the loose floorboard where he kept his savings. We'll manage. Sell some cattle. Take on extra work. Clay, stop. She caught his hands. You heard what they said. We're not really married. I'm not really your wife. You are in every way that matters, but not legally. Which means, she took a shuddering breath. After you pay them, after they leave, what's to stop them coming back, or others like them? There'll always be questions, always be doubt. He knew she was right, but the thought of losing her now was unbearable. Then we'll leave, go somewhere else, start over. Running, she said sadly. Always running. Is that the life you want? I want you. The rest doesn't matter. She touched his face, tears streaming now. It does matter. You deserve better than a life built on lies. Deserve a real wife, not someone else's widow pretending. He silenced her with a kiss, pouring everything he couldn't say into it. When they parted, both were shaking. You are my wife, he said fiercely. In my heart, in my home, in my bed. That's real. That's true. Clay, you coming out, or do we come in? Banks's voice, tight with tension. Clay grabbed the money box, but Miriam stopped him. Wait, let me think. She paced the small space, mind clearly working. The marriage to Samuel, it was forced. I was 17, had no choice. He was cruel. When I finally escaped, I took what I could carry, what I'd earned through years of labor and pain. None of that matters to them. No, but it might matter to the sheriff. Banks is a decent man. You said so yourself. She straightened. Decision made. Let me talk to him. Tell the truth. All of it. Maybe... Miriam, no, you don't have to... Yes, I do. She gripped his hands. I'm tired of running. Tired of hiding. If we're going to have a life together, a real life, it has to start with truth. Clay saw the determination in her eyes, the steel he'd glimpsed from the beginning. All right, but we do it together. They walked out side by side. Miriam stepped forward before anyone could speak. Sheriff Banks, she said, voice clear and steady. I'd like to make a statement. Sheriff Banks shifted in his saddle, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Ma'am, I'm not sure that's wise. Please, Miriam said. Let me speak. Pale Eyes started to object, but Banks held up a hand. Let her talk. Garrison, we're not in Kansas anymore. Miriam stood straight, hands clasped in front of her. When she spoke, her voice carried across the yard clear and unwavering. My name is Miriam Turner. When I was 17, I was forced to marry Samuel Harper, a man 30 years my senior who needed a young wife to work his farm and bear his children. I had no family to object, no money to run. For 3 years, I endured his cruelties. She paused, lifted her chin. The scars on my arms aren't from kitchen accidents. Sheriff, they're from trying to defend myself. Clay's hands clenched at his sides, but he kept silent, letting her tell it. When I finally found the courage to leave, yes, I took money, $300 from my employers, the Graysons, but it wasn't theft, it was payment owed. 3 years of wages they'd refused to pay because they said my husband collected them. Money I'd earned scrubbing their floors, washing their clothes, raising their children while my husband drank away whatever they gave him. That's a pretty story, Garrison interrupted. But stories don't change law. Let her finish, Banks said sharply. Miriam continued. Samuel Harper is dead. The Graysons have their money back already. I know because I sent it to them 6 months ago. Every penny. As soon as I could earn it honestly. I have the postal receipt if you need proof. As for the marriage, she looked directly at Clay, then back to the sheriff. I married Clay Thatcher in good faith, believing myself a widow. If the paperwork is invalid, we'll rectify it properly. But I am his wife in every way that matters before God and man. Silence stretched across the yard. Banks looked thoughtful. Garrison looked furious. She's lying, Garrison spat. No proof of any of this. Actually, a new voice said, there is. Everyone turned as Tom Morrison rode up, a leather portfolio under his arm. He nodded to Clay, then addressed the sheriff. Sorry I'm late. Took some time to get these wired from Kansas. He handed the portfolio to Banks. Telegram from Judge Whitman in Lawrence. Postal receipts showing money orders sent to the Grayson family. And this, a statement from Mrs. Eleanor Grayson herself. Banks read through the documents, eyebrows rising. Says here Mrs. Grayson confirms receiving full repayment. Says further that she regrets any misunderstanding and wishes no charges pressed against a woman who suffered enough under her roof. That's impossible, Garrison protested. We were hired. By Mr. Grayson, Tom interrupted, who apparently didn't tell his wife what he was doing. She was quite upset when the telegraph operator contacted her. He smiled thinly. Seems she never approved of how her husband handled the situation with the Harpers, or the money. Clay stepped forward. Tom, how did you... I've got a cousin who works at the telegraph office in Lawrence. Made some inquiries after our conversation the other day. Tom shrugged. Figured the truth might be more complicated than gossip suggested. Usually is. Banks folded the papers, handed them back to Tom. Well, Garrison, seems your business here is concluded. The debt's been paid. The woman's a widow. No crime's been committed in my jurisdiction. But I suggest you gentlemen head back to Kansas. Today. Banks's tone left no room for argument. Deputy Carson will escort you to the town limits. Garrison's face went dark with rage. This isn't over. Harper had debts, had claims. which died with him. Banks said, "Unless you'd like me to investigate who exactly hired you and why, I'm betting it wasn't entirely legal." The threat hung in the air. Finally. Garrison jerked his horse around, followed by his companion. Deputy Carson fell in behind them, hand resting on his rifle. Banks turned to Clay and Miriam. "I'll need you two to come to town tomorrow. Get the marriage properly recorded. Consider it a wedding gift. No fee for the documentation." "Sheriff," Clay said, "thank you. Don't thank me. Thank Tom for doing the digging. And thank your wife for having the courage to speak up." He touched his hat to Miriam. "Ma'am, takes a strong woman to survive what you have. Clay's a lucky man." After they'd gone, Tom dismounted. "Clay, I owe you an apology. When those men first came around, I listened to talk I shouldn't have. You made it right." Clay said, "That's what matters." Tom nodded, clearly relieved. "I'll be getting back to town. You folks need anything from the store, you let me know. Credit's good any time." When they were alone, Clay turned to Miriam. She was trembling now, the strength that had carried her through the confrontation finally giving way. He caught her as her knees buckled, lifted her, carried her inside. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe. You're free." "I can't believe. How did Tom know to—" "Doesn't matter. What matters is it's done." He set her gently on the bed, knelt beside her. "Why didn't you tell me you'd paid them back?" "I was ashamed. That I'd taken it in the first place. That it took so long to repay." She touched his face. "I worked every job I could find. Saved every penny. I wanted to be free of it before I could let myself think about a future. And the marriage? To Harper?" Her face darkened. "I never considered it valid. How could it be when I had no choice, when I was sold like property to pay my uncle's drinking debts?" She looked at him anxiously. "Does it matter to you that I was married before? The only thing that matters is that you're mine now, and I'm yours." He kissed her gently. "Tomorrow we'll go to town. Make it official. Would you like that? A proper wedding? We don't need— I want everyone to know you're my wife. Want you to have the wedding you should have had the first time." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Yes, I'd like that." They spent the evening in quiet celebration. Clay played his fiddle while Miriam sang, her voice stronger now, no longer hiding behind humming. They danced in their small kitchen, laughed over nothing, made love with a freedom neither had felt before. No more secrets between them, no more shadows from the past hanging over their future. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Miriam wore her best dress, the one she'd arrived in, now altered and decorated with small embroidered flowers she'd added during the winter evenings. Clay wore his new shirt, had even trimmed his beard. The ride to town felt different this time. People nodded as they passed, word having spread about yesterday's confrontation. Some looked curious, others approving. A few women even smiled at Miriam, seeing her perhaps for the first time as Clay's wife rather than a stranger with a mysterious past. At the courthouse, Judge Whitman was waiting with the sheriff. "Heard we have a wedding to make official," he said warmly. The ceremony was simple but perfect. Tom Morrison stood as witness, along with his wife Martha, who'd insisted on coming when she heard. Martha had even brought flowers, early crocuses from her garden. "Do you, Clayton James Thatcher, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." Clay's voice was strong. "Sure. Do you, Miriam Grace Turner, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." Miriam's eyes never left Clay's. "Then, by the power vested in me, by Wyoming territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." "Clay." The kiss was tender, a promise sealed before witnesses. When they parted, Martha was crying happily. Tom was grinning, and even the judge looked moved. "Now then," Judge Whitman said, signing the certificate with a flourish, "let no one question the validity of this union." Outside the courthouse, several townspeople had gathered, As Clay helped Miriam into the wagon, Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house called out, "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Thatcher." Others took up the cry. Clay felt something ease in his chest. Acceptance. Finally. Not just for him, but for Miriam. For them together. "Wait," Martha Morrison said, hurrying over. "I have something." She pressed a small package into Miriam's hands. "Wedding gift. It's not much, but—" Miriam unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a delicate lace handkerchief embroidered with tiny roses. "It's beautiful. Thank you." "Welcome to Redemption Creek," Martha said. "Properly, this time." As they drove home, truly home now, Miriam tucked her hand into Clay's arm. "How do you feel?" "Like I can breathe for the first time in years," he admitted. "You?" "Free," she said simply. "Free and whole and yours. Always," he promised. "No matter what comes. No matter what." She agreed. That night, as they lay in their bed in their cabin on their land, Clay realized the rifle was still in the main room where he'd left it that morning. For the first time since Willow Bend, he felt no need to retrieve it. "I love you," he said into the darkness. "I love you too," Miriam whispered back. Outside, spring was coming to the mountains. Inside, it had already arrived. Spring came to Wyoming like a miracle that year, painting the meadows with wildflowers and filling the air with bird song. Clay stood at the edge of his property, their property now, watching Miriam work in the garden she'd started. She'd insisted on planting as soon as the ground thawed, talking about tomatoes and beans, herbs for cooking and flowers just for beauty. "You'll want vegetables come winter," she'd said, dirt already under her nails. "And the flowers will make the place look like a proper home." Now, watching her kneel between the rows, sun catching in her dark hair, Clay felt that familiar tightness in his chest. Not the old pain that used to live there, but something else. Something that felt dangerously like peace. "You planning to help or just stand there admiring the view?" Miriam called without looking up. "Can't a man appreciate his wife's hard work? He can appreciate while holding a hoe." She shot back, but she was smiling. Clay joined her in the garden, working the soil beside her. They'd developed an easy rhythm over the months. Comfortable silences punctuated by conversation. Sometimes Miriam would tell him about the books she'd read, painting pictures with words of places neither of them would likely see. Sometimes Clay would share memories from before, the good ones he'd almost forgotten existed. "My mother had a garden," he said now, breaking up clods of earth. "Nothing fancy, but she grew the best tomatoes in Ohio. Used to say the secret was talking to them." "Talking to them?" "Every morning she'd go out, tell them how fine they were looking, encourage them to grow big and sweet." He smiled at the memory. "My father said she was daft, but her tomatoes won prizes at the county fair 3 years running." "Then we'll talk to ours," Miriam decided. "Can't hurt." That evening, as they sat on the porch Clay had built, another of Miriam's suggestions that had become essential, she brought out something wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it." Inside was a photograph in a simple wooden frame, the two of them on their wedding day, standing in front of the courthouse. Tom Morrison had arranged for the traveling photographer to capture the moment without telling them. In the image, Clay looked startled but happy, while Miriam gazed up at him with an expression of such complete trust it took his breath away. "When did you—" "Martha Morrison brought it by last week when you were checking the herd. I've been waiting for the right moment." She studied his face anxiously. "Do you like it?" "Like it?" Clay pulled her close, kissed her temple. "It's perfect. We'll hang it right there, where everyone can see. All the way out here, who's everyone?" "The horses," he said solemnly. "They've been asking about our wedding pictures." She laughed, the sound bright as water. These days, she laughed often, and each time felt like a gift. Later, as they prepared for bed, Miriam noticed the rifle still propped in the corner of the main room where it had stood untouched for weeks. "Should we put that away properly?" she asked. "In the barn, maybe?" Clay considered. Part of him still felt exposed, without it near, but a larger part recognized the truth. He didn't need it anymore. Not like before. "Tomorrow," he said. "We'll clean it properly, wrap it in oilcloth, store it up in the loft. But not tonight. Not tonight." He drew her close. "Tonight I have better things to hold on to." They made love slowly, tenderly, with the deep knowledge of each other that came from months of learning, of trust built day by day. After, they lay entwined, Miriam tracing idle patterns on his chest. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked softly. "Beyond tomorrow? I mean, years from now." "Sometimes." He captured her hand, brought it to his lips. "What do you see? This place thriving, the herd growing, maybe—" She hesitated. "Maybe children. Would you want that?" The question hung between them, loaded with hope and fear in equal measure. Clay thought about it seriously. Imagined small versions of Miriam running through the garden, learning to ride, filling the cabin with noise and life. "Yes," he said finally. "If it happens, and if it doesn't, you're enough. You'll always be enough." She was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "I might already be, with child. I mean, it's early still, but—" Clay's heart stopped, then resumed at double speed. "Miriam, are you sure? Not completely, but the signs—" "I think so." He rolled to face her, cupped her face in his hands. In the moonlight, he could see tears on her cheeks. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "But yes, happy. Are you?" "Beyond words." He kissed her gently, reverently. "A baby, our baby. It might come to nothing. Sometimes these things don't take. Then we'll face that together too. Whatever comes." They talked quietly through the night, making tentative plans, sharing fears and hopes. By dawn, Clay felt transformed yet again. First a broken soldier, then a hermit, then a husband, now possibly a father. Each change had terrified him, and each had brought unexpected grace. Over the following days, they went about their routine with new awareness. Clay found himself watching Miriam for signs, a hand pressed to her stomach, a moment of dizziness, and hovering until she shooed him away. "I'm not made of glass," she insisted after he tried to take a water bucket from her hands. "Women have been doing this since Eden." "Not my woman," he said stubbornly. "Not carrying my child." She softened at that. Let him carry the bucket. "Our child. Our child," he agreed, marvel in his voice. 2 weeks later, on a perfect spring morning, Miriam called him from the garden. She was standing among the young plants, one hand pressed to her belly, face pale but radiant. "I felt it," she said, "like butterfly wings. I felt the baby move." Clay dropped the harness he'd been mending, crossed to her in long strides. "You're certain?" "Yes." She took his hand, placed it where hers had been. "It's real, Clay. It's really happening." They stood there in the garden, his hand on her still flat stomach, both of them crying and laughing at once. Around them, the world burst with new growth. The garden, the wild flowers, the trees leafing out in tender green, life everywhere, abundant and unstoppable. That evening, Clay finally moved the rifle to the barn, wrapped carefully and stored high in the loft. As he climbed down the ladder, he felt something shift inside him. Some last guard finally standing down. Walking back to the cabin, he could see Miriam through the window, lighting lamps against the gathering dusk. She was humming again, that same tune she'd hummed in the early days when she thought he couldn't hear. But now she didn't hide it. Let her voice carry clear and true. Clay paused in the doorway, watching her, his wife, the mother of his child, his unexpected salvation. "What are you thinking?" she asked, noticing him there. "That I'm the luckiest man in Wyoming territory." "Only Wyoming?" She moved into his arms. "I was hoping for the whole frontier at least. The world, then," he amended. "The whole wide world." "Better." She stretched up to kiss him. Now come inside. Supper's ready, and I made something special. What's the occasion? Being alive, being here, being together. She smiled, echoing her words from months ago. And being 3 instead of 2, pick one. All of them, Clay said. I pick all of them. As they sat down to dinner in their lamp-lit cabin, Clay thought about the long road that had brought them here. The war, the nightmares, the loneliness. Miriam's suffering, her courage, her choice to trust again. All of it leading to this moment, simple, domestic, and more precious than any treasure. I've been thinking about names, Miriam said, passing him the bread. If it's a boy, I'd like to call him James, after your middle name. If it's a girl, Sarah, Clay said immediately. After my sister, if you agree. Sarah Thatcher. Miriam tested the sound. I like it. They continued talking, making plans, dreaming aloud. Outside, night settled over the mountains, peaceful and deep. Inside, 2 people who thought themselves beyond saving built a future out of hope and stubborn love. And in the corner where it used to stand, the absence of the rifle spoke louder than its presence ever had. Clay Thatcher no longer needed to guard against the world. He had something better now, someone to share it with. And soon, someone new to show it to. I love you, he told Miriam as they prepared for bed. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for being worth not giving up on. She replied. They settled into bed, her back against his chest, his hand protective over where their child grew. For the first time in his life, Clay fell asleep without checking the doors, without listening for danger, without fear. He simply held his wife, felt their baby's butterfly movements, and knew himself complete. The rifle stayed in the barn, gathering dust and slowly being forgotten, while in the cabin, life bloomed fierce and beautiful and unafraid. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West. Where are you listening from? Drop a comment and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts about Clay and Miriam's journey. What part of their story touched you the most?